morning. Good morning. We're talking about families in this series, and so since everybody has one, it's one of those things that applies to everybody. And so as we dive in, I want to ask you to kind of mentally, you don't have to do this out loud, but mentally just kind of think through, what was it that shaped your expectations for family? What are the things that kind of, filtered through your mind and through your experiences and your feelings about what family should look like and how it should feel and how it should work? I mean, for most of us, a lot of that happened in childhood, right? I mean, as we're growing up, as we experience things, as we see things, we see what's going on in our family, we see what's going on in other families, and usually one or two things happen. There's things that we say, hey, I want to make sure I do that, I have that in my future family, and other times we see things like, I want to make sure I don't have that in my future family. So much of it is shaped by our childhood, but there's other things, there's other impacts. So what were some of the other impacts for you that shaped your assumptions about what your family should look like and how it should operate? Now, this is pretty shallow, so you'll just have to excuse me. For me, I realized one of my biggest ones were TV programs, right? I watched TV as a kid, and these were reruns. I'm old, but I'm not that old. I watched reruns of the Andy Griffith Show. I watched reruns of Happy Days. I watched reruns of a show called Family Ties, and those things kind of helped maybe or hurt my expectations about what a family should be like and how it should work. And you had something similar, whether it was TV shows or movies or maybe, younger folks at social media, whatever it is, something has shaped your expectations about what family is supposed to look like and how it is supposed to work. But the crazy thing is, we all end up in the same place. No matter what shaped it, we all have this set of expectations. It's very, very similar. We want kind of, if you're an adult and you have children, you want those hallmark moments with your kids. You really want those special moments with your kids, and you expect to have those. And if you have adult parents and they're still alive, you really hope that those moments with your parents are going to be those times where they're so wise and they're so patient and they come at just the right time with encouragement and just the right time with timely advice, and you really want that from your parents. And if you have brothers or sisters, you want them to be like your staunchest defender, like they got your back no matter what, and at the same time they love you so much they'll always tell you the truth. We all want the same things, and then, of course, we want to get together, right? When it's Christmas, when it's a celebration, when somebody accomplishes something, all the big family moments. We want everybody in the house and everybody loving each other and everybody having a great time. Those are the expectations. Reality, sometimes, is different than the expectation. Reality is more like the college student that brought his girlfriend home to meet his mom, and he was so excited, and he brought her home, he rings the bell, and they come inside, and he says, Mom, I want you to meet Kaylee, and before he gets anything else out, Mom interrupts, and she looks straight at him, and she says, you can do better, don't settle for this. And he's like, Mom, how could you say that? I love her. And she says, I was talking to her, right? Like that's kind of, a lot of us, that's the family we experience, right? Like, yeah, I get that. Or maybe your family treats you like God. They forget you exist until they want something, right? Then they're like, oh, yeah. We all have these kind of strange expectations, and then we have reality. And a lot of times they don't match up. And family has changed quite a bit. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I was kind of looking, what does family look like today? Well, today, the average couple that gets married for the first time, the first-time marriage for a woman is usually around 28. The first-time marriage for a man is usually around 30. So it's a little bit older than it used to be. First-time mom, her average age is 26. Unfortunately, most families, which used to be a staple, don't eat regular meals together. Used to happen all the time, doesn't happen much anymore. Gen Z, those are the kids 18 and under right now, and the ones coming up behind them. Documented, they are the most lonely generation in history. Because I'm Gen X, I think, whatever that is. I was born in the 70s, whatever that is. We didn't have a chance to be lonely because anytime people got together, they just shoved all the kids in a yard, in a room, in a car, and said, play. We didn't really have a chance to be lonely. But Gen Z does. And maybe worst of all, 24% of people say that they have a family member that they no longer talk to. Because of conflict, because of disagreements, because of politics, because of whatever, they no longer talk to them anymore. So they have, in effect, cut them out of their life. And so you see this gap starts to emerge. Maybe you've experienced all of those, or maybe you've experienced some of those, or maybe none of those, but for most of us, there's a gap between what we expect, what we hope for, what we treasure, what we really want deep in our hearts when it comes to family, and the reality that we experience. And that gap creates something. It creates frustration. The bigger the gap and the longer the gap goes, the more frustration we have. And unfortunately, it's pretty common because what we know is, and this, you're probably not like this, but I'm like this. We know from our friends, from our coworkers, maybe from extended family, that they have frustrations in their family. That there's things that aren't working right, that things don't go right, and this person did that, and this person did, whatever. And we know that, and we know that those things happen, but it's so different when it's our family. Like, we know we shouldn't expect to be immune, but for some reason, when it happens to us, all of a sudden, it's like, wait a minute, no. I was going to escape the averages. That wasn't going to be me because I did it different. I did it right. I know everybody else is having problems, but I shouldn't be having problems. And we all face this gap between what we expect and what we're getting. And good news, bad news, we're not the first ones. As a matter of fact, as long as there's been families, there's been family frustrations. And the question isn't, are you going to have them? The question is, what do you do in the middle of them? And so we're going to look at the story of a man named Abram in Genesis 15. If you've got a Bible or you want to follow along on the app, in Genesis 15, we read the story, or part of the story, the life story of Abram, who was a wise, wealthy leader. I mean, he was one of these guys that everybody looked at and would say, man, he got it figured out. He won. He got it dialed in. He knew how to do life and do it well. And he's coming off this incredibly emotional, physically draining, just terrifying kind of experience. Because if you were here last week, you heard Pastor Corey did a phenomenal job talking about what happened to his nephew Lot. Lot got caught up in a war, and his family was kidnapped, and he was carried off. And Abram, he's not a military guy, he's not a soldier, he's not a commander, but he rallied everybody he could get, and they went after these guys, and they caught him, and they rescued his nephew. It was just an incredible experience, but you can imagine how amped up and how ill-prepared and how scary that kind of experience would be. And he's coming off of that, and he's starting to wonder, because he had some expectations about his family and his future. And they weren't happening. And so what do you do when you're frustrated about your family? And maybe if you're just completely being honest, you're frustrated with God. What do you do in that moment? And Abram shows us a picture of what that could look like. In Genesis chapter 15, verse 1, let's look and see what happens. After this, and that's what I just mentioned, after everything happened with Lot, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eleazar of Damascus. And if you read the story, Eleazar is kind of a guy that's almost been like a son to him. He's been in charge of everything. He's been with him a long time, but he is not his family. And Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. And the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is of your own flesh and blood will be your heir. And he took him outside, and he said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. And he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And again, if you know the story, this is a reminder. God has made this promise before. This is why Abram has the expectations that he has. He's being reminded of that. And then verse 6, his response. Abram believed the Lord, and he, it's talking about God, credited it to him as righteousness. Stop there for just a second. So Abram's coming off this incredible experience. He's toast, right? He is worn out emotionally, physically, spiritually, and he's wondering. And you've been there. You've been in these moments. And he's kind of starting to complain a little bit. Like, what is going on? What is going to happen here? Because I thought, you told me, God, that I was going to be the father of a nation. And so I thought maybe because he was the only one, it would be my nephew, Lot. And Lot left. And then I went and rescued him at risking my own life. I went and rescued him and brought him back. And then he left again. So it's not him. Maybe it's Eleazar. I mean, that's not my design. That's not what I would choose. That's not how I want to do it. But God, maybe that's what you're thinking. Maybe that's how you want to do it. So is he the guy? No, it's not him. Well, then who is it? And little spoiler alert, we're going to talk about this next week. But Abraham does have a son in a little bit of an unconventional way, and his son's name is Ishmael, and it turns out it's not him either. And he's frustrated. And Abram has what I call a but God moment. I guarantee you may have called it something different, but you've had a but God moment too. It's, yeah, I get it, I know, but God, fill in the blank. I've been waiting so long to find the right person, to get married, to get connected, because I believe you have this for me, and I believe this is what I'm supposed to do, but I can't find them. But God, we so want a child. We have been waiting for this child. But God, we've done everything we know to do. We've tried to follow you, but God, we still don't have a child. But God, we raised her right. We raised her to follow you. We put our faith on display in front of her all the time. But God, she's walked away from faith and from us. See, we've all had these but God moments when it comes to our family. And Abram is in the middle of a but God moment. But God, what? You've promised. I have expectations. I have frustration. I see no future. I see no plan. I see no way to get there. But God, you keep telling me to believe. But God. You been there? You felt that. Whether you called it that or not. But God. Abraham did. And it turns out, it says Abram's response in all of this, after he made his complaints, after he remembered God's promises, was belief. He responded with belief. And I know when you read that and you hear that, you think, okay, well, it is a Bible story. You know, it's kind of supposed to go that way, right? But belief is hard, isn't it? It's hard. It's hard when you continually faced with but God moments. The gap keeps getting bigger. You keep getting disappointed. You keep being delayed. The things that you think are supposed to be happening are not happening. The people in your life that you care about, that you are counting on, that you deeply want relationship with, it doesn't seem to be working. Belief becomes very, very difficult. But for Abram, at least in that moment, at least in that but God moment, when he responded with belief, he was actually declaring something that we need to hear. And it's this, that disappointment and delays are not denials. Being disappointed does not mean you're being denied. Things being delayed does not mean God is not at work. Being frustrated doesn't mean that God is not going to come through. And the response in the middle of those things is belief. Abram believed. But as you sit here, and if you are in the middle of your but God moment, it's a little tough. I'm going to give you an idea about how to make it easier to believe. Now, God reminded Abraham and told him to remember, and we're going to come back to that a little later this morning. But one of the things you do, if you're really trying to find belief in the middle of a but God moment, is you have to go back to who he is. You have to go back to what he's like. I've walked with God before. I've known him. I've seen him. I've seen how he's loved me. I've seen how he's blessed me. I've seen how he's been at work in my life. And that makes it a little easier to believe. But I want to give you a secret. Belief is never going to be easy in a but God moment. But I can give you the easiest path to belief in the middle of a but God moment is to borrow somebody else's belief. That's the easiest way to do it. Borrow somebody else's belief, somebody else's faith. Borrow it. Bring it into your life. And how do you do that? And this isn't a plug. This is real life. This is why we encourage people to get into community groups. Because you can walk with people that love God and love you and that have been through their own but God moments. And so when you need someone to help you believe in the middle of your but God moment, you are walking with someone that's already done it. You can borrow their faith. And all of a sudden, what was so difficult becomes easier. It doesn't become easy, but it becomes easier to believe when I'm walking with other people that believe and will let me borrow some of their faith, because in this moment, I am in a but God place. Not only is it hard to believe, let's go one step deeper. Often, you don't want to. You've believed before, and it didn't work. You trusted before, and it didn't turn out. You kind of set yourself up, especially when it comes to family. So many times you've had that. Well, maybe if, and then if, and we could maybe, and possibly, and then it'll all work out. And it doesn't. And so to protect yourself, to protect yourself. You say, I can't do that again. I can't set myself up for the pain that comes with that. I can't set myself up for even more frustration. I can't do that anymore. And you shouldn't. You absolutely should not. You see, there's something incredibly distinctive about what Abraham did. Abraham did not believe in an outcome. He believed in God. He wasn't believing for a result. He was believing in a person. And those are hugely different. When you set yourself up to say, I am believing for them to apologize. I am believing for them to forgive me. I am believing for them to change their heart. You're setting yourself up for failure and frustration. But when you believe in God to be your shield, to be your provider, when you are trusting him, when you know that he's good, when you are trusting that he loves you, when you are trusting that he is in control, when you are believing in him and not believing for an outcome, that changes things. That's exactly what Abram's experience was, and it may be what you need to experience. To stop believing in an outcome, that one day, someday, this relationship will be fixed, that one day, someday, they will apologize, that one day, someday, everybody will realize it was just a big mistake. But rather, to put your trust in the one who says, I will be your shield and your comfort and your security, and I am in control, and I love you like no one else. And instead of believing in an outcome, believing in him. See, that's how you respond. That's how you respond to the frustration. This is something we've been going to say throughout the whole series, but responding to God today helps me move past what happened yesterday. Because we all have stuff that happened yesterday. Some of it was our fault, some of it was somebody else's fault. Whatever the difference, doesn't matter. Responding to God today is what's going to help you move past what happened yesterday. And it sounds so neat and cut and dried and like it's, a nice little prepackaged with a bow on it. But Abram still has a question. Look at verse 7. Maybe you have a question too. Verse 7, he also said to him, this is God speaking, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land and to take possession of it. And again, he's reminding Abram, I promised to make you the father of a nation, and I promised to give you this land. And Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? It's a really nice and respectful way of saying, it hadn't happened yet. How do I know this? I mean, why can I believe this even? And the Lord said to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged them in halves opposite of each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Well, that was good for the birds, I guess. Then the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. Okay, stop there. Everybody got it? You know what to do now? This is strange, right? Let's just admit it. This is odd. Like, this is kind of crazy. Get 3 animals, cut them in half, lamb, what is going on? It's a cultural thing. In this culture, if you were going to make a solemn promise, an unbreakable promise, this is what they did. Now, I prefer a handshake or a contract, but this is what they did. And the implication was, this was how serious it was, may what happened to these animals happen to me if I don't keep my promise to you. God is making the most solemn promise to Abram that Abram can understand. He's guaranteeing it, saying this will happen. It's a lot to take in. And if you continue reading, you find out that Abram has this spiritual experience. He has this vision, and in this vision that he hears from God. And God tells him that it's going to be 400 years. 400 years before his people take possession of this land. And if you keep reading in Genesis, the other thing you find out, it's going to be another 25 years before this son is actually born. So some of you have been waiting on family issues for a long time, and you might hear that and you think, this is not encouraging. We got to cut stuff in half and wait 400 years? I mean, that doesn't sound good, right? That's not what I want. And I understand. It is a long time to wait. And if the frustration's big and the wait is long, it's so easy to get filled with, I love this word, angst, right? It's a little bit of anxiety. It's a little bit of anger. It's a little bit of nervousness. It's a little bit of fatalism. It's just a sense of, And for so many, when it comes to family, because of the frustration, because of the weight, because of all the other things, that angst has kind of taken over. Forget it. Why even bother? They're always going to be that way. It's never going to be any good. You know what? If that's what they want, fine, let them have it. You know, it's that angst that's just behind all of that. So what do you do if you have to wait and you're dealing with all this angst? Again, it comes back to belief. And I want to show you how in just a second, but here's the big thought, all right? Processing angst with belief is what brings assurance. It comes back to belief again. It comes back to that belief that can be so elusive, but is so incredibly important. So let's step into today's world for you. Maybe there is a family situation and you're just frustrated. You've been at it for a while. Your expectations are up here. Your reality is down here. You feel the frustration. You feel the disconnect. You've hoped, and maybe you did kind of believe in an outcome, and it didn't happen, and so that's kind of set you back, and you're trying to believe in God, but it's difficult, or maybe you just don't feel like you have a lot of experience believing and walking with God anyway, and so I'm not really sure how to do that. And what do you do in the middle of all of this when it becomes so obvious? You're going to have to wait. Because you know this too. You can try to manipulate it. We're going to talk about that next week and how that goes. It doesn't work. You can try to orchestrate it. You can try to work around it. You can try to force it. You can try to sneak to get everybody together and, kind of play the go-between. I'm going to talk to him, and then I'll talk to her, and then we're going to make it all. And you know how that works, don't you? It makes what's already messy, messier. At some point, most of us realize you have to wait. You have to wait. What do you do when you wait? For Abram, he did some really simple but incredibly powerful things. He did what God told him to do. He got the animals, cut them in half. And he sat down and he waited and he guarded it. He guarded it because the other animals were coming around and he shoo them off. And he's just sitting here waiting. I'm waiting for God. And he has this powerful spiritual experience. And for some of you, maybe all of you that are waiting with frustration right now, that's exactly what you need. You need a spiritual experience with God. And can I say something? And I know this sounds a little weird. Ask for it. Ask him for it. For Abram, this experience became the anchor for him that held him through. All the times that he would doubt in the future, all the times that he was waiting, the 25 years for the son, the 400 years way after he died before the land showed up, he kept coming back to this anchor. And you need an anchor too. There is nothing wrong with asking God, would you speak to me? Would you give me that spiritual experience? Would you connect with me and give me some assurance here? God wasn't mad at Abram for asking questions. God wasn't mad at Abram because he needed encouragement. God wasn't mad at Abram because he didn't understand. You're no different. Ask God. It may come in a dream or a vision. It may come sitting in a worship service like this. It may come when you're reading the Bible and God is speaking to you. It may come because a close friend or a family member or another believer speaks something into you and you know that was God speaking to me. I heard that from them, but I also understand God was using their words. Ask for that spiritual experience. Ask for that anchor to get you through your but God moments, to help you close the gap when you're experiencing that frustration. And when you have to wait, ask God to show you. There's a couple things that are going to happen in that. A couple things you're going to be able to do because you are waiting. And like I said, you know that manipulating just makes it messier. So what do you do while you're waiting and you're waiting for God to speak and you're waiting for God to respond and you're kind of in that moment? Well, the first thing is the thing you don't want to hear. It's be still. Be still. That's exactly what Abram did. He did everything God told him to do. And he sat down and waited. And it goes against everything. We want to fix it. We want to get in there and make it happen. We want to kind of create the situation we want to have. And God says, be still. Be still. It goes back to belief. If you really believe that he is who he said he is, if you really believe that you can trust him with everything, and that he loves you more than anything, you can be still. You can ask God. Now, God's not a genie in a bottle. He's not going to just wait for you to wish and then he'll give you whatever you wish for. He loves you, though. He's your father. And he also knows this, and catch this, and I know this isn't always fun to hear, but it's important for you to know. Sometimes there's things that happen in your heart when you're still that can only happen in your heart when you're still. And if you're running around and you're fidgeting and you're messing around and you're doing all the things and you never slow down to be still, those things don't happen in your heart. So first thing, be still. Do everything God told you to do. Guard your heart and be still. Second thing you can do while you're waiting is to remember to re-engage. Remember to re-engage. And this isn't, oh man, I almost forgot. I got to re-engage. Not that kind of remembering. This is a different kind of remembering. When you're toast, like Abram was, when you're worn out, when the gap seems huge, when your frustration level is high, when you're not ready to trust again, when you've kind of felt like we've been down this road before and it never has worked out, God calls you to remember. For Abram, he reminded him of the promises that he had made. For you, let me give you just a couple of quick questions you can ask yourself. Because I guarantee you, if you will actually take the time to answer these questions, it will force you to re-engage with God in a powerful and positive way. Especially if you're starting to feel a little burnt around the edges. First question, super simple. Who has God put in your life that you count as a blessing? Yeah, I know things aren't going well right now. I know the family's messed up. I know I'm frustrated. I know it's not what I expected. I know all this, but who? Who has God put in your life that you count as a blessing? I am so glad that person is in my life because of what God has done through them and in me because of them. Who? Second question. How? How has God provided for you in the past? When has he come through before? Maybe it was a physical thing. Maybe it was an opportunity. Maybe it was, just giving you money or food or whatever the case may be. But how has God provided for you in the past? This is amazing as you start remembering, as you start thinking, as you start walking back through your own personal history of how God has showed up and provided when I didn't know how it was going to happen. It reminds me that the impossible, the difficult, the unbelievable, the unpredictable is no problem for God. Third question. So I'm asking who is in my life. I'm asking how has God provided. And I'm asking what prayers has God answered. What are the things that I've gone to God about before and I've prayed for and he answered me? He answered me. And sometimes the answer was yes and he gave me exactly what I was asking for. And sometimes the answer was no and he gave me something better than what I was asking for. What are the prayers that God has answered? Finally, last question. So I'm asking about the prayers that God has answered. I'm asking about how God has provided for me. I'm asking about who the people God has put in my life. The last one, and this is probably the most personal. How has God's forgiveness healed me? How has God forgiving me healed me, changed me, made me into a different person? As you start to answer those questions, you will begin to remember who he is and what he is like. And you will re-engage, maybe at a level you never have before, and it happens when you remember. So while you're waiting, be still. And then while you're being still and waiting, remember. And then finally, listen and embrace. Listen and embrace, because God is going to speak to you. And again, if you're running around doing all kinds of other things, you're not going to hear it. If you're too busy trying to manipulate situations and work people and things, you're probably going to miss it. But if you're willing to be still, if you're willing to remember and listen, God will speak. And then you can embrace what he says. I don't know how Abraham responded to 400 years till your people show up and 25 years till your son shows up. But it seems, if you continue to read the story, that he began to feel a peace. And instead of feeling frustrated, instead of always comparing expectations and reality, that belief allowed him to rest in what God had said. If we listen, we can begin to embrace what God says. And here's kind of the killer part about all of this. You're going to have to wait. You know that. Belief is what takes your waiting from being meaningless to meaningful. Something actually happens when you wait. And it can be very, very meaningful if it's done in the context of belief. If it's done outside the context of belief, waiting starts to feel incredibly meaningless. 2 Peter 3:9, we'll put it up on the screen, and it tells us exactly what's going on. It said, the Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. So many times, the reasons we are waiting, whatever the situation is because God is working and he is bringing people to repentance. We listen and embrace. We may not always understand the wait. We may not always know the reason for the wait. But we can have confidence that God is at work in the time that I am waiting. And it all hinges on this very simple idea of belief. And so as I wrap up this morning, I just want to challenge you. If you already made the decision to walk with God and follow Jesus, and he is the one that sets the pace and direction for your life, then let this be an encouragement. Especially if you're in a but God moment, or you know somebody that's in a but God moment. Go to them and emphasize how important belief can be and lend them your faith in the middle of their but God moment. If it's your moment, embrace it. I know you don't like it. I don't like it either. But embrace it, because God is going to do something. But if you're not a follower of Jesus, if you're not walking with God, if the idea of belief seems too hard and too far, Paul picks up on this idea. Later he writes in Romans, he said, Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. And he's making a point. He is saying that believing in Christ, following Jesus, is the very first step of belief. And when you make that first step of belief, it sets your life right. And your life can never be right outside of that belief. And so maybe that's the step that you need to take today, is to step into belief for the first time, to see your life set right so that you can deal with the frustrations and the gaps and the difficulties when reality and expectations don't match up. Can I pray for you? Let's pray together. Father, family is so personal. We kind of know everybody else's family has problems, but it's when our family has problems that it gets so serious. And so, Father, as we think about what happened to Abram and how he had to work through the difference between what you'd promised and what was happening, and his frustrations, he chose belief. And Father, that's exactly what we need. Would you help us? Would you send people into our lives that have a strong belief that we can borrow? Would you help us to be the kind of people that are willing to lend our faith to others to help them through their moments? And Father, for some, would you give them the courage to believe for the first time today? To trust you. And to know that in the middle of the most frustrating, difficult waiting, they can actually walk with you in such a way that they can have peace, even if they have to wait a lot longer than they ever thought they would. Father, thank you for our families. Thank you that you love us in the middle of the frustrations we experience and even the frustrations we cause. God, continue to speak to us as we continue to worship you. In Jesus' name, amen.